Hi, friends. It's December 2nd, and our second Christmas story begins in Germany or Austria. It kind of depends on your point of view. And a little bit of background is really important for understanding this story. Now, for centuries, this area of Germany, Austria was technically part of the Holy Roman Empire. And that's a bit of a misnomer. It wasn't holy, it wasn't Roman, sometimes it wasn't even an empire. But during this time, that lasted for 1,000 years, but during the 1700s, the German states, they began to get some de facto autonomy. They got to mostly run themselves. That changed in early 1800s. Napoleon conquered everything. And so for a while, these German states and Austrian states, they were ruled by France. And of course, the Germans, Austrians, they did not like this at all. And a deep animosity for the French was built through that. Napoleon, of course, eventually the tables turned against him. And then at the Congress of Vienna in 1815, France was punished, a German confederation was formed, Austria and Prussia gained a lot. And so all of that to say that by the time of 1818, when our story starts, there was political chaos. It was just crazy. Borders were being drawn and redrawn, and the states were not happy with one another, and it was just a national mess. It was also a cultural mess. They were trying to push back on the French culture and develop the German culture, and these different states not happy with one another. It was kind of a time of chaos. Might remind you of today somewhat. And so that's kind of the background of our story. Our story actually starts 1818 with Assistant Pastor Joseph. Now, Assistant Pastor Joseph, he is a part of the pastoral team of St. Nicholas. It's in a small alpine village in this German-Austrian area. And he decides, that night he's going to go to a play. Plays are really big in his time. And so he goes several towns over and he goes to a play. It's a nativity play. And him being a pastor, he wants to see it. And it was really good. He really enjoyed it. He was touched. And so at the end of the play, he hung out with his friends for a while. And then as night falls, he begins this long walk home. And he's thinking about the play. And he passes by this village, and to him, it just looks perfect. He decides, this is probably the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. He sees the village at a distance. He sees the smoke coming from the chimneys, and he's dwelling on the nativity. And just at that moment, I guess it starts to snow. And so it's not to downplay the moment, but it was like a real Hallmark moment. But it really got to him, and he stood there in the cold because he wanted to take it in as long as possible. He didn't want to forget that moment. He didn't want to forget that sense of peace. It was just washing over him, looking at this beautiful village, dwelling upon that night that Christ came. For him, that night that Christ came, that was the perfect night. And the night that he was witnessing at the village, that was number two. And he wanted, of course, being a pastor, he wanted for his congregation to be able to share in that sense of peace and tranquility that was his for that evening in that world of chaos. It would be so much better, he thought, if they dwelled on things like that, on that peace, than instead of their hatred for the French or the concern about the future. Pastor Joseph had written a poem a few years earlier, and he decided that if it was set to music, it might help capture the peaceful night that he was experiencing. So he continues on his walk home. And he stops by the door of the church musician, Franz, and knock, and Franz opens the door, and he says, "Hey, I want you to drop by the church tomorrow. I've got an idea." And so he plans on meeting Franz, and he wants his poem set to music. They're going to sing it on Christmas Eve at the service. But here's the thing. When they got to the church the next day, it had been flooded. The river flowed through Joseph's village, and this river had risen, and it had flooded the church. It was a mess. Can you imagine if a river went through your church? That was what happened. And their organ, which was their only musical instrument at the time, it was non-functional. It wasn't working. And so Franz comes in, he's looking, and Franz is like, I don't think we can have Christmas Eve service. But Joseph's on a mission. He's experienced that peace. He wants his congregation to understand that peace. And so he says, no, we're going to get this cleaned up and we're going to have a Christmas Eve service. He says, you don't need an organ. You've got a guitar and we're going to use that instead. Which is kind of interesting because at the time, guitar was not considered a proper instrument. But Joseph didn't care. He wanted this done. So they got it all cleaned up. And at St. Nicholas Church on Christmas Eve, 1818, Franz has set Joseph's poem up to music, and Silent Night is sung for the first time, accompanied by a guitar. A few weeks later, the organ maker comes, and the organ maker's there to repair the organ. He fixes it. Franz is there overseeing the work. Franz is asked to play a piece on the organ, so that the organ maker can make sure that everything's working properly. So he does, and he plays Silent Night because he didn't get a chance to do it on the organ during Christmas. And the organ maker, he's just blown away. He's listening to this, and maybe he's experiencing some of that peace that Joseph had on that night. And the organ maker loves it. And so Franz says, do you want a copy? He says, yes, I want a copy. So he makes a copy. And so the organ maker, he takes it back to his church. And he plays it. And that church loves it. And two musical families, because again, plays were very popular performances, two musical families within that church, they love it. And they add it to their repertoire. In the meantime, the political chaos, it keeps going on. More happens. Another Congress is called, in this case, to make all the German states work together. There's not going to be any more tariffs. There's going to be a united currency. Austria was excluded. It's very bad for Pastor Joseph's village. The Prussian king becomes basically the president, the most powerful man, and things are a mess. But as fortune would have it, the Prussian king, it becomes close to Christmas again, and he's asked for people to come and to perform Christmas for him. And one of those families from the organ maker's church comes and performs for him. And they do all the normal things. And then they sing Silent Night. And the Prussian king is just overwhelmed at what he hears. He is amazed. His heart is smote. And so he makes a law on the spot. And he says, this song will be sung in my lands on Christmas Eve, every Christmas Eve, everywhere in my lands. And so it literally becomes a law. Time moves on. 1839, the Silent Night, as a carol is spreading through Germany. Franz, who originally wrote it, he dies. Most people didn't know he was the composer. Franz was a hardworking father of 12, and he was not known for his compositions. People thought Bach or someone like him had done it, but it hadn't. In the meantime, Austria's singing family, the Rainers, they were popular at the time. They went to the United States. They held a concert at Trinity Church in New York. People loved it. A priest named John Young translated the song, and his choir added it to their the Christmas carols they sang, and that's how we got our English version of Silent Night. But fortune didn't improve for the people of Joseph's village. In 1864, more war came. The borders were redrawn again, and that happened 3 more times in the next 4 years. Austria, Germany, Austria, Germany. The village's sons were constantly being called to war. It was horrible for this place. And finally, in 1900, the river that had flooded the church before, it rose, but in this case it rose much higher. It flooded. The church was destroyed. Its foundations were damaged beyond repair. The village that Pastor Joseph had seen that inspired Silent Night in the first place, a little bit down the road, it was washed away completely. It was swept away. But the song, of course, endured. And the peace that it described continues to make an impact to this day. Here's the point. Events around us, nationally, locally, personally, they're going to conspire to sweep away your peace like a flood. But when we stop and we take in the peace that is offered to us, like Pastor Joseph did that perfect night in 1818, then despite all of the chaos around us, that same peace can endure within us. And that's the story of Silent Night. Grace and peace to you, my friends. And remember, don't forget the important things this season. Take care.